All right, from the Fairfax City, we're very grateful that Matthew Parmenter accepted the invitation to our show. Matthew, welcome to my humble podcast, man.
Thank you very much, Claudio.
No problem. Matthew, let's go back to the beginning of your life. Were you born like in a musical family? How were you when you perhaps began taking guitar lesson, piano lesson, and you know?
So
That's
I
all.
guess, yeah, I was born in a musical family. My mother played the piano quite well. Um, she was a church organist as a young person, like a child. And then she could read music quite well. Um, and so she played the piano a lot as we were growing up. So I got to hear her play the piano. My father was also into jazz music and played different wind instruments, but he didn't play much as I was growing up. He had kind of quit playing, but he played by ear, that sort of thing. So then I was the youngest child of four, and all my older siblings uh, took piano lessons. So I would hear their piano lessons, um, and listen outside the door while they played. And I always liked to play. Like my mother tells me, as a 2-year-old, she would push the high chair up to the piano and let me just play while she did housework. So I would listen to their piano lessons and sort of play by ear, and then like after in those days, the piano teacher came like a doctor did back in those days. They did house calls. So this woman would come and teach my siblings. So then after those lessons, apparently it was frustrating to the kids, to my siblings, because then I would go play what they were playing in their lesson, by listening. Apparently I was an ear player at a young age. So I've played music all my life. I've written songs. I mean, I think I wrote my first song when I was 3 years old that I remember. And I remember meeting my longtime friend and bass player, Mathew Kennedy, who is in my band now. And when we were 3 years old, we were put together as playmates by our parents. We were the same age in the same neighborhood. And I remember meeting him. I mean, I was only 3. How can it be? But I remember it was like, and he remembers meeting me, and I dragged him into the music room to play piano for him, because that's all I did as a child. I would pretty much just play the piano. So yeah, I came from a musical family, and I was fortunate to have a piano around the house to play all the time.
I got you. Great, thank you. What about high school? Were you in any bands, high school?
In high school, I I wanted to play with other musicians. I wasn't very good socially. The piano playing all the time didn't make me get into sports. My brother, my older siblings were more into sports than I was. So by the time I got into high school, I was just writing songs by myself on the piano. And by that time in junior high, just before high school, I was forced to take violin lessons.
Yeah.
So that I would learn to read music. I couldn't read music. And my piano teacher, I had lessons with a piano teacher, and he told my mother that it would be very difficult for me to learn to read because I played by ear only. And so they forced me to take lessons on a violin. So by the time I was in high school, I was playing in the orchestra with the violin. I had learned how to read on that instrument. And on the piano, I was still writing songs and whatnot on the piano. And that's when I met our first guitarist, John Boda, who's on our earlier records. I was coming in early once a week to join what they call the jazz band at school, which were, arrangements for wind instruments and that sort of thing. And I was the piano player. And I remember meeting John Boda at one of these lessons. He had all these friends who knew that he could play, and he was playing, Jimi Hendrix sounding things on the guitar, and it just blew me away. So after rehearsal, I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, would you like to come to my house and play sometime?" So he came over, and immediately we were sat at the piano, and he was learning tunes that I had written, and he could play by ear very well. So we pretty much started playing all the time since then. And by the time we were done with high school, we had sort of formed a band with a bass player and a drummer with no particular name. And then after high school, that band morphed into what we call Discipline.
Great, excellent. You finished high school. Any pressure from your family about? Well, I imagine that you knew back then that you wanted to get involved in music or become a musician. But any pressure for your parents about, hey, forget about music. You're not going to make any money. Go to law school, get married, get a wife. Or you were free to choose.
No, they didn't. They didn't discourage music. In fact, I was fairly good as a violin player at that time. And I auditioned to go to a college in Ohio called Oberlin. They have a very well-known music conservatory there. And I auditioned for this. You had to play, scales, and you had to play pieces by memory. But I had to play this one Bach piece, and I blanked my memory. I forgot. I just panicked in the middle. So I botched that audition pretty badly. It felt like, have you ever seen someone whose name but you can't recall their name?
Well, absolutely.
And then you panic. You're like, I know the name, but I can't find it, and it's embarrassing. And that's pretty much the way it felt when I botched that audition. So after that, I didn't want to play the violin anymore. I was so embarrassed. I kind of put it away for many, many years, all the way through when my children were born. But so they didn't discourage the music. I ended up going to college, to the same college, for creative writing, which is also not a career. Not a lawyer or a doctor.
Yeah. Well, if you're happy in your life, and that one is matters, right? So,
when you're young, you don't know if you're going to be happy when you're older. I've had a lot of self doubt as a young person growing up, and I wish, everybody says this, but I wish looking back, I could have not worried so much. Because things seem to work out more or less.
Right. Oh, I understand. Let's talk about Discipline. Discipline was formed in 1987, adopting the name for an influential King Crimson album, of course. The band has released multiple studio albums and appeared in several progressive rock festival, right? Near Fest, Cross Fest, Prog Escape, and so on and so forth. Let's talk about any one of these festival, if you recall, and looking back at some of your memories, anyone in particular that you felt that we played very well, we made it, so to speak, attending a particular festival.
Well, we're fortunate to be in this musical niche called progressive rock. I think the festivals just sort of fell one after the other. Like for example, I was we played one festival in Baltimore, not far from you, called Progscape. It was put on by a record distributor there, and we played at Progscape with a band called Anekdoten from Sweden, who had come over to join us on a little mini tour in the Midwest. And I think that was, we also played in Quebec, Canada. Anyway, we played this festival in Baltimore, and the guy named Peter Renfro there, a person in attendance, saw our band and really enjoyed it. And he then started a festival called Prog Day down in North Carolina, which is where he's from. And he invited us to play the first festival. So in a little bit of a way, we were influential in starting that festival, just because he wanted a forum for us to be able to play. And we played there for 5 years before our band sort of had to take a break because of membership changes. And then I was told by the people that started Nearfest that in a way they followed on from Prog Day because they wanted to start a festival similar to Prog Day, but on the east, more east, and that's what I believe it was Rob LaDuca or the other organizer whose name escapes me right now, who told me this. And they said, in a way, discipline was helpful with the Prog Day, it was also a little bit helpful with the Nearfest, even though we never played Nearfest until, I don't know, 2008 or something. But your question was, did we ever feel like we arrived? And it's like, no, it just sort of, everything seemed very organic back in those days, you know? In fact, when we were invited to play Nearfest, we had not been playing for several years. And it was on account of their request that we had to sort of get the band running again. And that's really been our normality. It's sort of like we do our regular life, we fall off, and then we get requested to play something, and we ramp up the train again. We get moving faster. And right now we're in a really good place because we'll be playing a couple of festivals in the fall, and we're ready to do those again because we put out this album and we're back in good form.
Yeah, so I imagine that all of you have full-time jobs, families, and so forth. So it's music is like a part-time thing, if you will, right? That you release an album on and off, and then get together again, and then tour or create a new album and so forth, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, it's very difficult to make it as a musician, so I know exactly where you're coming from. The band did a 1993 tour in Norway to support the first studio recording, Push and Profit.
Yeah, that was pretty bizarre. I mean, I got a call from the organizer who said, "How would you like to come to Norway?" And I said, "Oh yeah, sure." But I didn't expect it would actually happen, and then it did. He was on his college board, and on the music board for his college, and was able to influence them to bring us over.
Got it. What memory do you have for that?
Not very many memories.
Not many.
I remember. I remember meeting a lot of his friends, and they were like, they were great. We played a club in Oslo that was pretty awesome. I remember we went out to a disco one night that was pretty cool. We also played a show at their college. They had a big a room. It might have been a gymnasium, I think, and we played there. But it was all dark and disco colored. Gosh, I don't remember. It was bizarre. It was, it's very bizarre to we play so infrequently, and that was like early on. We were just playing at little clubs around Detroit, and this fellow saw us at a club in Detroit and decided to bring us to Norway. It's like, how does that happen? How can this be? We've been very fortunate in that respect. I'm watching my screen here, and it's like the sun is gradually occupying more of my screen. Maybe by the time we're done, I won't be on the screen.
Don't worry about it. The band remained independent in its inception, right? But I think in 1995, I read somewhere that you were approached by American rock label, Magna Carta Records, right? But
Yes.
eventually the deal didn't go through. Feel free to elaborate on, in general terms, what things did.
Yeah. Um, it didn't work out. We had some disagreements with them over some of the lyrics of the albums, of the music. They were very. I think they were sensitive because they they maybe had put out some music by other artists who they later regretted or something like this.
Yeah.
So they were very sensitive with some of my lyrics being a little bit, especially at that time. I was trying to push the boundaries a little bit about what one was allowed to say in a song.
Yeah.
And I mean, looking back, maybe they were right that would make people uncomfortable. But at the time, I felt like it was important to push those boundaries and see what could be said. You know, some of the things I wrote might not be considered patriotic, and that was important to me to be able to express these ideas and prove to myself that I could express these ideas. And anyway, it just didn't work out. We had to back out because they wanted me to change some lyrics, and I wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, so that particular conflict, right? A record label, you were signed or a record label, and then they put a lot of restriction on you guys and on any band for that matter, and then either you go forward or you don't, right? Because sometimes they go to extreme, right? So
I always wonder, like, what would have happened if we'd have stayed with them. My guess is because the next album we put out was Unfolded Like Staircase, which we put out independently, which was our biggest selling record.
Yeah.
And it's possible that had we put it out on a proper label, it would have gotten more attention. But in the end, again, we put it out by ourselves, and it was very organic. We had a distributor, Symphonic, who brought our records all over the world. He did that with our first CD, Push and Profit. And when our next CD came out, it just took off on its own, even though it was an independent thing. So, I mean, I think it's good that we did not sign with the label, but I'll never know.
That's right, yeah. On 2011, the band released the To Shadow All Accord, which is it's a studio album. I think in between they were like 13 or 14 years. It's a very good album. And then, of course, in 2012, you end up releasing another album, and then Chaos Calm Order. So so you were, releasing new album, new material. What was the acceptance from the public or radio station to play your music? And because it's as you said before, it's very tough to make it, right? So eventually a band release an album and they want to move up a little bit, and then release another album, they move up a little bit, and sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't happen, and you say, well, what are we doing here, right? So you look back on that period to 2012 to 2014 or so and say, well, are we making it into the music business? Do you want to make it into the music business, or you take like a hobby?
That's an interesting question, because I understand that. As a young person, I imagine, you watch the Beatles or you watch big name stars who take off. And one can't help but imagine what would that be like, And so I understand what you're talking about a band releasing an album and expecting maybe to move up or not. And that can probably be disheartening for a band when that doesn't happen. However, at the same time, as I said, I went to college for creative writing. We studied many contemporary writers who weren't successful. They didn't make a lot of money. And the writing professors even talked about, I don't know if you're familiar with the Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. It's a famous bunch of letters by
Yeah,
the poet written to someone who's asking the poet for advice.
I got you. Good.
And
Yeah.
they sort of had us read this in translation. And but to come to the point, um, the purpose of writing is to write. And although it's important to record it so that other people can hear it, and then it's important to perform it so that people can see it live. For me, the focus has always been the moment of writing, the joy of that,
Yeah.
and everything else after that kind of seems like something you're doing to allow others to hear it. And I never, I've always been very focused on the creative process first. And partly maybe because of this education I had about other writers and poets and fiction writers who, we all know about Stephen King. Again, we all know about the Beatles.
Of
But there
course.
are many, many writers who write and live their lives in virtual obscurity, and yet they're doing great work.
Yeah.
And so I was comfortable with changing my perspective after college this way and not worrying about whether it would be successful at all. Not to mention that, I'm a progressive rock musician. We're always a little suspicious of the successful band,
Sure.
But the main thing is is it music that you love to write? Is it music that one enjoys listening to? I don't really think about. I mean, we're very fortunate that we've had the success we've had, but it's never been the reason for doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. I completely agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's your life and you do what you want to do, right? Whether you become successful or not, or for me, the same with the interviews, right? So I thought, well, if one person see the interviews or a million, it wouldn't make a difference to me. This is like a selfish endeavor, and I love to talk to people because music has given me so much satisfaction, whether it's your band or a big name mag or somebody we're starting. Uh, it's your life, right? And you need to do what you need to do, right? Uh, the journey being, like we say here in the United States, right? So the journey being more important than destination, right? So
There's some truth to that.
absolutely, I completely agree with you. Yeah, no. At the beginning, funny story. At the beginning, my first interview was with Steve Hackett from Genesis, and I remember telling Steve that I wanted to do something different, that I wasn't interested in the money or the fame, and a lot of people doubted me, saying, you have an accent, and yeah, you go to a lot of concerts, you know a lot of music, but nobody will give me at the end of the day. Uh, the more than people say that kind of stuff, the harder I work. So and I accomplished what I wanted to do. Right, same with in your case with music or writing. It's your life, and you know, you are the only one facing the mirror, right? And say, well, I'm happy doing what I'm doing or not. Yeah, so also.
Well, and there's also inside all of us, there's a child, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I do feel an obligation to that inner child, because I remember being alone in the room and worrying about the future and thinking that I wouldn't find a place here. And so there is a sort of when I am finally releasing something, when I am finally doing something for the others to see, I feel like that child inside of me is quietened down a little bit, and is, I'm not as worried about what people think of me, or what that child worried about, you know. I don't quite know how to put it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. In 2014, the band released a double CD. This one is for England. I I was able to listen to, well, a lot of music I found either Spotify or Bandcamp, and that music is very good, man. I mean, I see a lot of great qualities on your music, and some band member come and go and so forth, but the core is there. Um, and then I feel that, from my humble opinion, little by little, you guys were, moving up and making a better record after the next, a better record after the next, and that's a very good, great album. It's a very good album, and I don't know all your music, but I listen to a lot of stuff you have done the last 3 days, as I was putting questions for this interview, and you guys do okay, man.
Yeah, we do all right. We've tried to be true to the vision, and remain thoughtful in the music, and So I'm grateful that we've been able to do this for so long, and it has been a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. The latest album, Breadcrumbs, is the first album in 8 years. The first question, stupid question, why wait too long to release another album after 2017?
Yeah, this could have come out a couple of years earlier, but there were other factors. Our drummer Paul Dzendzel, whom we'd known since high school, took a job that caused him to travel all over the country, and he told us a couple of years ago or more. He said, this job is good, and I'm concerned that I'm not going to be able to stay in the band and record. And when he first told us that, we were reluctant to let it. We didn't want to replace him, So we tried for a year or two to see if we could work with him on the weekends or work with him when he was home. But there were other factors. It was very difficult to get it together. So finally, we decided, okay, we'll go a different direction. Fortunately, my son Henry plays drums very well. He's played all his life. He's got a great sensibility for progressive rock, and even has listened to some of the Italian prog, that sort of thing, which is a little bit less mainstream. So he fit in and he'd even filled in for Paul a couple of times over the past 5 years, when there were shows that we wanted to take, maybe over the past 10 years, when there were shows that we wanted to take that Paul couldn't attend. So he was willing to come in and record with us for this album. So we recorded all the drums. We recorded scratch tracks, which is, the musicians playing their instrument onto tape, but not the final takes, if you know what I mean. And so but the main thing was to get the drums ready. So we recorded Henry on the drums with scratch tracks, scratch vocals. And then I went to the piano. I own a small baby grand piano, and was recording the piano on this, then took the recording of the piano back to the computer, because we all record on computers now, to dump the piano track in, and the computer would not boot. So I spent not quite a year, maybe half a year or more, struggling with getting the old recordings out of the computer and into a new system. So we were delayed another year, let's say, because of that. But in fairness, yeah, we're not prolific. We don't come out with an album every year. We all have our lives separate from the music, and we do it because we're giving our time to the band, and just don't have a lot of time for, we don't have the luxury of living in the studio the way, a big name band might.
Yeah, I got you. I was listening to the lyrics, and I review certain reviews that many elaborate on the lyrics elaborate the current state of the world and in the U.S. at this moment, and look inward into the human inner soul, if you will, and loveliness, heartbreak, and so on and so forth. And feel free to elaborate.
Well,
Right.
remember this song was written a few years ago,
Right.
Breadcrumbs, but it does sort of talk a little bit about. I was struggling with the concept of how we have this newfound freedom online to express our ideas, which is great. I'm all for the democratization of expression. At the same time, there was a time when editors would intervene, and you had newspapers that could be sued for their content,
Yeah.
for being inaccurate. Today, that's not the case. Pretty much anyone can say what they like, and the platform that they say that on denies any responsibility or culpability. So you get this proliferation of ideas, which may not always include a proliferation of actualities or truths. But nevertheless, I also witnessed, myself and friends posting ideas online that that might have been more extreme. And it occurred to me that, unlike when I was a child growing up, if someone had something extreme that they said, or maybe you heard or told an inappropriate joke, right? That wasn't recorded for all time. That wasn't who you are forever. That was who you were at that moment. And you could reflect, and you could change your mind, and you could grow and decide maybe you don't want to be that person anymore.
Sure. Sure.
And my sense is that with the way we are publishing our ideas so readily now, it might be difficult for people to change their minds. Because once you publish an idea, you're sort of held to account for that idea, and people can criticize you openly. And next thing you know, you're having to defend your view, or
Sure.
block people off of your view. So these things were spinning around in my head a little bit as I wrote the song Breadcrumbs.
I know exactly what you mean, and remember that you say 20 years ago, or whatever, the internet was, growing up, social media didn't exist, and so people were allowed to say certain things, X, Y, Z, and now kind of the internet has memory or so, right? And it's hard to undo stuff you said or you have done or whatever. And yeah, I in my humble opinion, I don't like social media that much. I'm not involved, only the minimal, and I don't need it, to tell you the truth. And but I know exactly what you mean by that statement. Of course, the record was mixed by a famous producer, Terry Brown. Feel free to mention who he is or what the work he have done. I needed to look it up. I didn't know who he was, but
But now you do.
now I do, right? So
Yeah.
it's very
Well,
famous guy, actually.
he's an artist, and
Yeah.
when it comes to audio, he does things that I cannot do. Fortunately, Chris Herin, who joined our band 10 years ago as the
Yeah.
guitarist, he was in a local band, Tiles. I should mention his solo album that he put out last year, which you need to check out if you're not familiar with it. Chris Herin did an album called Hiding in Plain Sight,
Yeah.
which he co-produced with Terry Brown. And
Yeah.
are you familiar with the album?
No. I need to check it out. No.
You should check it out. He's got a lot of well-known guest musicians on that album, members of Rush, members of Jethro Tull, Peter Frampton guests on it. It's a
Wow.
it's an impressive album, and it's chronicling Chris Heron's experience when his father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and sort of tells the story of how that felt to him in different songs. And it's a great. I was fortunate enough to sing on a couple of the songs, and Chris allowed me to co-write a couple of the songs. But it's a great album. Came out last year. Anyway, I forgot how I got into oh, you were asking about Terry Brown. So Terry produced that record with Chris, but he also mixed our album. Terry is famously a producer for the Rush band, and many others.
Correct. Yeah.
He's just phenomenal, and I made his acquaintance through Chris. When Chris joined my band 10 years ago, he encouraged me to to put out a solo record that I'd recorded. He heard some of the tracks and said, "You should ask Terry if he would mix this," and Terry agreed. So I put out a solo album mixed by Terry, and then Terry mixed our next Discipline album and also remixed this album we put out called Unfolded Like Staircase. So it sounds much better than it ever did when we originally released it. And then Terry was willing to mix Breadcrumbs as well. If you hear it, it sounds great. And also, I don't know if you're familiar with the term the loudness wars. Have you heard this?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
This is so just for people that don't, this is when they take music and they artificially make it louder by compressing it so that the dynamic range is reduced so you can boost the overall level. And Terry said, look, the loudness wars are over. We're going to let this album be dynamic. It's going to have, highs and lows in volume. And and it really does. It sounds like a classic recording instead of something that was churned out in the 1990s,
Gotcha. Good for you. Well, obviously, you have done some, solo album that were released on an independent level. I think it was Astray from 2004 and Horror Express from 2008 as well. What memory do you have for that one?
Well, and then I put out a third album, which I was just talking about, called All Our Yesterdays, which was put out on,
right? Yeah.
That was put out on a British label, Bad Elephant. Yeah. But that's, I think, currently out of print. What was the question about the solo album?
What memory do you have for, recording Astray and Horror Express?
So my memory of recording Astray is that it was 2004, I think a couple of years before. My daughter was born 4 years prior to that. And at one point, my wife made a comment that I think she saw on an interview show, somebody saying how important it is that you pursue your passions so that your children see you pursuing your passions. And I thought, all right. And I interpreted that as, okay, time to make a solo album. Even though I have this child and she's, my focus right now. So I did start working at home on this solo record, and it turned out very well. Some of the distributors said, "Why didn't you just call it Discipline?" And I said, "Well, in my mind, it didn't sound like Discipline, but they thought it did." And also, it was just me playing all the instruments, except for my friend Mathew Kennedy playing the bass, and that's sort of so far what the solo albums have been like. It's been mostly me playing with maybe a guest musician or two. And so that didn't feel right to call it Discipline,
Yeah.
But it's an outlet. It was an outlet for me to do music when Discipline wasn't doing music.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And all the bands out there do the same, right? They write work that it wouldn't fit the band that they're currently on, but there's something that they want to do, right? So it's great that people do that, right? It's an outlet, like you said, So it's good that you have done that. Well, feel free to elaborate on the collaboration with hopefully I will pronounce it correctly, but Kate Hinote Trio.
Yeah, she pronounces it Kate High Note.
High Note Trio.
And when I first saw it in print, I thought it was Hinote. Well, this goes back to the story I had told earlier when I auditioned for college and I botched my violin audition and put the violin away. I pretty much didn't play the violin for many years. I recorded a little bit on discipline. I would pull it out to play a track or two, but I didn't devote much time to the violin after that. Meanwhile, my kids were growing up, and I encouraged my kids to take violin lessons. And then by the time my kids were in high school, I started playing a little bit again.
Yeah.
So the Kate High Note Trio is an acoustic folk trio. I joined it, but before I was in this band, Kate had a different band that she was the lead singer. There was a female backup singer, and my friend David Johnson was the guitarist. And David Johnson would invite me, online. You send an invitation, come see our show. And I didn't come for a year or two. Finally, I did come see a show, and I was amazed at how well this woman sang. And I thought, wow, I would love to work with her somehow. And so then I had been playing the violin a little bit more by that time. And I thought, well, maybe that would be an outlet for me to play the violin and work with something. What really attracted me to her was her singing. She sang. What attracted me to her singing was her pitch. She sang very well in tune, which is not. I mean, that sounds like a very basic quality to singing, but not everybody can do it. I can't do it. I sing a little out of tune when I sing, but she even in live performance would sing right on pitch. And I even thought maybe she was using a tuner because she was so well in pitch to me. Anyway, I thought I sure would like to work with them. And so then I bumped into David Johnson, the guitar player from that trio that was a different trio. And I bumped into him at a show, a different band's show. And I asked him, hey, how's that trio going? And he said, oh, the second singer, the backup singer, had moved out of the state. So they were just doing it as a duo now. And at that point I said, oh, well, if you would like an extra instrument like a violin, I'd be happy to try it out. And I didn't hear back from them for a long time. But then eventually the singer, Kate, she reached out and said, would you like to come to a rehearsal? And at that point, we formed the Kate High Note Trio. We've put out a couple of records now. The last one is called Stowaways. It just came out a couple of months ago. And I have co-written several of the songs on that. So it doesn't sound like discipline, but it's not all the most, it's kind of unusual music here and there. They're kind of unusual stories in the songs.
I got you. That's great. Have you thought about, for people that you admire, creating another album where you invite different guests for, track one, work with that guy, or track three, work with, that lady, and so forth. Any people that you admire that you wish you could have the opportunity to bring them together into a new album, a solo album, I imagine, or
that's a really good question. And I've wondered about that, especially with Chris Herin,
Sure.
and as sort of a guide. He's done that with his album. He plays the guitar, he sings, but he has other people playing the guitar and other people singing. He does play on his record, but it's completely the opposite of my solo records, where it's always been, mostly my heavy lifting and a few guests, or maybe one guest. Yeah, I would very much like to do that. And there are lots of phenomenal musicians whom I've met and, over the years doing what I'm doing. So I've often thought, oh, wow, why don't I do something like that for a solo record? I even kind of started reaching out to a couple of musicians saying, hey, if I did something, would you, whatever. But right now I'm so focused on this last Discipline release. Most of my time has been promoting this, preparing shows for this. But maybe if there's a solo record coming, I can include more people at the table.
I got it. In terms of touring now with Breadcrumbs, any touring?
Yeah, we hope to
Coming
be doing more touring next year, actually, in
this year?
2026. And in part that's because our drummer is still in college, and he will graduate, and then we can do a string of shows, we hope. But in the meantime, we do have a few things lined up. We had our CD release last week in Detroit, and then in the fall we've got 3 shows in October. One of them in Chicago at our labels. He has a large house, and he fills up the basement with people to see bands. So we'll be playing at what they call Monforte Manor in Chicago. I can't remember the date. I think it's the 1st of October. And then we'll be playing that weekend in Wales at a festival called Summer's End in the UK. This is their 25th anniversary festival, and they invited us back. They normally don't allow bands to come back, but for this 25th anniversary, they've invited some bands to come back and play again. So we're fortunate to be able to do that. And then a week later, we'll be in New Jersey playing at the Prog Stock Festival. And the Kate High Note Trio will also be at the Prog Stock Festival that weekend. So these are what's coming up for the remainder of the year.
We attended that festival, so we'll stop by and say hello. We can take a picture. We can.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. We can redo this whole interview.
We can do one live. No, we don't. No. What we don't want to redo stuff. And it was very nice talking to you, my friend Matthew. Feel free to mention your website, Bandcamp, where people can buy your music, support you, and so forth.
Yeah. So, well, the label that put out Breadcrumbs is called progrock.com. He's got a label called progrock.com's Essentials.
Yeah.
So you might check it out there. We have a website. Our old label is called Strung Out Records. So it's like www.strungoutrecords.com. If you go there, you can find links to the other places.
I got you.
And then we are also available on the Bandcamp streaming. And I think I think the label's now put it out on some of the other services like Spotify and stuff.
Yeah. Last question. What's your take on, as a musician, of the future of Spotify? Whereas my humble opinion is rip off, but what can we do about it to be more fair? As people don't know, in Bandcamp, I think you get paid 90% of the profit goes exactly into the artist, right? So
Bandcamp is attractive for independent artists.
Yeah.
Also because they now have an app that's like Spotify, where if you buy music on Bandcamp, or if artists on Bandcamp make it available for free, you can stream it like you would with Spotify. You asked me about Spotify and what do I think the future is. I think we need to reconcile ourselves with digital distribution overall. It's a double-edged sword. Nobody likes the waste of the old printing industry, the paper, the resources. I get it. But at the same time, once we lost that physical printing, we got into this world where you can't maintain a business. People aren't advertising. They're doing it online, and there are fewer people doing the work and fewer people validating that work. The printing. Look, the same thing is happening with digital music. We used to put out pieces of plastic, which were bad for the environment. And so I understand people saying, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to download it for free or pirate it. And somehow there's a rationalization there that's better for the environment. And so it doesn't matter whether the artist gets paid. And I think that kind of mentality mixed into a business model like Spotify's, where it's like, well, at least you're making a fraction of a penny. for the downloads that people are hearing, which is better than nothing when it was pirated, but it's really a far cry from being able to make music recording your primary thing. So I've heard it for many, many years when piracy was gaining popularity back in the 2000s, where it was like bands should only make, I heard this said, bands should only make money when they tour. That was one rationalization. I guess I'm old fashioned. I remember when you used to cultivate an album, you would put it out and people wanted to hear it, and there was a way for them to hear that album. They had a player in their car. They don't do that anymore. It's all online now, and yeah, it's a bit of a shell game where the money goes. At the same time, I go right back to when I was, learning in college about creative writing, and going right back to, well, are you a writer? If you're a writer, you're going to write anyway. And that's where I'm at. I'm going to compose songs anyway, because that's how I'm wired, and that's what I love to do. But hopefully, you asked me about the future of Spotify. I hope that in the future there is legislation that requires people to be compensated for their work. I worry about automating people out of work. If you go to the supermarket, you can check yourself out now. You don't even need a person to help you. And I guess we're trading convenience for community sometimes. So those are my thoughts. I don't have well-formed thoughts on this, but I have a certain amount of, I guess, old school suspicion for some of the change that's coming.
Yeah, I know what you mean. At the same time, young generation believe, so to speak, that music should be free. If you go to a restaurant, it's not free. If you go see a movie with your wife, your kid, or you see a concert, it's not free. You need to be. Why some people will think that, hey, music should be free. I should be able to download it or consume as much without paying anything, which is a crazy idea, I feel. Right?
Yeah, it's an unusual idea. I think it should be free for you to pick up the guitar and play it. If you can get your hands on a guitar, that music should be free for you to pick it up and play it for yourself. But if you're playing music that someone else prepared, it should at least be recognized. Also, it's music on the FM radio for years has been played without compensation to the artist, and I'm not necessarily opposed to that, because it's allowed exposure for those artists.
Yeah.
So it's a trade-off. Is Spotify the equivalent of FM radio? Maybe it is.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, Claudio, I very much appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you very much. I will see you in a couple months. Good luck to you, and let me know if there is anything else I can do to.
All right. Well, do stop when you come to New Jersey. Stop and say hello to me so that I can shake your hand.
You bet, man. You bet. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
All right.
Take it
Cheers.
easy, man.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye. Bye, my friend.